I came home from my fishing trip to find my nephew's girlfriend sprawled across my fabric armchair, feet up on my side table, scrolling through her phone like she owned the place. My nephew Ethan stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said, "Uncle Rob, we need to talk. We're staying here now permanently." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just looked at them both and thought to myself, they've picked the wrong old man to mess with. They were about to learn that peace and weakness are not the same thing. But before I tell you what happened next, hit that subscribe button to hear how I won my house back, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm sharing this because sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people we trust most. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Robert Harrington, though most folks around Seattle still call me Rob. That was my name back when I ran the boatyard, back when the salt and sweat were the only things that kept my hands steady. I'm 67 now, retired, going on 5 years. I can feel every mile I've sailed, every heavy wrench I've turned, because my knees complain when the rain comes in off the Puget Sound. And my hands aren't as steady as they used to be, but my mind, it's sharp as ever. Sharper, maybe, because when you get to my age, you learn to see the tides beneath the water. You learn to notice the small things that younger people miss. I live in a 3-bedroom house in North Seattle. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Paid off 25 years ago, a monument to a life well lived. My late wife, Margaret, and I bought it back in '89. Can you believe it? Back when you could still afford waterfront property on a working man's salary. She passed 8 years ago, leukemia, and the house felt enormous after that. It became a silent echo chamber. Every room, a photograph, every empty chair, a conversation cut short. Too many rooms holding memories that echoed in the silence. I knew that silence well, but I didn't know how desperately I needed it broken. And that was the mistake that let them in. It was a quiet desperation they used as a tool to pry open my front door and my life. She died when Ethan was 19. Sudden aneurysm, and his father had never been in the picture. I stepped up because that's what family does. I helped pay for his trade school, got him set up with contacts at the dockyard, let him crash in my spare room during his apprenticeship. He was a good kid back then, quiet, respectful, grateful. Then he met Kayla. She appeared about 8 months ago, a stark, shimmering contrast to the quiet life we led. 26 years old, all Instagram poses and designer labels that didn't match her bank account. I tried to be welcoming when Ethan brought her to Sunday dinner. Margaret always said I could be too quick to judge, so I gave her a chance. But I noticed things. I saw the way her eyes didn't look at me, but looked around my house, calculating the angles, assessing the value. I noticed the way she touched everything like she was appraising it for sale, and the way she interrupted Ethan mid-sentence, and he'd just shrink back and let her talk over him. It was a little tremor of fear, a surrender I didn't recognize in the boy I helped raise. That moment, I knew I was looking at a man who was no longer in control of his own life, or mine. 3 months ago, Ethan called me. His apartment building was being renovated. Something about asbestos abatement, and they needed a place to stay. Just 2 weeks, he promised. Maybe 3 at most. I said yes because he's family, and the house had been too quiet for too long. Anyway, 2 weeks became a month. A month became 2. Every time I'd bring it up, gently suggest maybe they start looking for a new place, Kayla would find an excuse. The rental market's impossible right now. Uncle Rob, we're saving for a down payment. It'll go faster if we're not paying rent. Ethan just needs 1 more certification and then we'll have so many more options. I let it slide. I told myself I was being the family man, that I was helping them save for their future. I convinced myself Margaret would have done the same, and I used her memory as a shield against my own bad gut feeling. That was my first mistake. A simple kindness weaponized against me. Have you ever had a good deed blow up in your face? Let me know your story down below. but keep listening, because the second mistake was far greater. It was giving them the time they needed. It was going on that fishing trip. My buddy Frank had been planning this trip to Haida Gwaii for 2 years. 3 weeks of trout fishing, camping under the stars, unplugging from everything. I almost canceled because something in my gut told me not to leave the house. I should have listened to the old man's intuition. It was screaming. But Frank insisted, and I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Ethan had a key. He knew the alarm code. He'd take care of the place. I left on a Tuesday morning in early September. The drive up the coast and the ferry crossing gave me time to clear my head. By the time we were anchored in our first spot, rod in hand with the mist rolling off the water, I felt lighter than I had in months. I remember the sheer, beautiful absence of worry. It was a complete detox. For 3 weeks I had no cell service, just the ocean, the rhythmic pull of the fish, and the easy company of old friends talking about nothing important. It was exactly what I needed. It was the perfect picture of peace, and in retrospect, that profound rest was the very thing they were counting on. It was exactly what I needed. When I got back home on a Thursday afternoon, I knew something was wrong. The second I pulled into my driveway, there was a different car parked where I usually put my truck, some beat-up Honda with expired registration. The lawn hadn't been mowed. The garden Margaret had loved, the one I still tended every weekend, was overgrown and littered with cigarette butts. I walked up to my front door and found it unlocked. Not just unlocked, but standing slightly ajar. The smell hit me first. Stale beer, old takeout, something sweet and chemical I couldn't place. I stepped inside, and my heart didn't just sink, it plunged to the floor. The living room, my sanctuary, looked like a fraternity house after a weekend binge. Pizza boxes stacked high on the side table, empty beer cans everywhere, dirty dishes covering every surface. But the true violation wasn't the mess. It was the theft of history. My bookshelf, the one I'd built by hand with Margaret, a piece of our marriage, had been shoved violently into a corner. Why? To make room for a massive, garish TV I'd never seen before. And they'd mounted it right over the fireplace, right where Margaret's favorite painting used to hang. They hadn't just moved things, they had erased her. I walked slowly through my own house like a stranger. The kitchen was worse. Dishes piled so high in the sink that some had tumbled onto the floor. The garbage was overflowing. Something in the fridge had gone bad enough that I could smell it from across the room. Then I heard voices upstairs. Laughter, music playing. I climbed the stairs, each step making the old wood creak. The sound that had once been comforting now felt like a warning signal in someone else's territory. My bedroom door was open. I stood in the doorway and took it all in, and the cold of the Pacific followed me. The bed Margaret and I had shared for 33 years was gone. It wasn't just furniture. It was the sacred space where our life had been lived, and it was gone. In its place was a king-sized monstrosity with black leather padding, a thing utterly alien to our home. Our wedding photo was gone. The walls had been repainted from the pale green Margaret loved, a color of peace and softness, to a stark, aggressive white. The small shelf where I kept her favorite books was gone. I realized the grief wasn't just about my things or my home. It was the double grief. They hadn't just invaded my present, they had actively tried to destroy my past. And there, lounging on the bed like she was posing for a magazine, was Kayla. She wore a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, scrolling through her phone. When she looked up and saw me, she smiled. Not a guilty smile, not an apologetic smile, a smile that said she'd been expecting this. "Oh, Uncle Rob," she said, stretching like a cat. "You're back early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." I couldn't speak. My throat had gone tight. She sat up completely comfortable, completely at ease. "So, what do you think? We did a major upgrade in here. That old furniture was so dated. This is much better, don't you think? Where's my bed? The words came out quieter than I intended. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, we donated that. And the dresser was just taking up space, so we put it in the garage. This room gets the best light, and we need space for our stuff. You understand? Before I could respond, Ethan appeared in the doorway behind me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Hey, Uncle Rob, he said. Good trip. I turned to look at him. Really? Look at him. The nephew I'd helped raise. The boy who used to sit at my kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner. He stood there with his shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. Ethan, I said slowly. What is this? He shifted his weight. Look, we've been talking, and this arrangement, it's working really well for all of us. You've got this big house. You don't need all this space. We figured we could take this room since it's the master and you could use one of the smaller rooms. It makes more sense. Makes more sense, I repeated. Kayla stood up now, walking over to stand beside Ethan. She put her hand on his arm, and I watched him lean into her touch like a puppet on strings. We're doing you a favor. Really, she said. Her voice had that sweet coding people use when they're trying to sell you something you don't want. This house is too big for you to maintain alone. We can help with upkeep expenses. It's better for everyone if we just stay permanently. The word hung in the air like smoke. Permanently. I looked at them both standing there in my bedroom, in my house, telling me how things were going to be. And something inside me went very cold and very quiet. Get out, I said. Kayla laughed. Uncle Rob, don't be dramatic. I said, get out. My voice hadn't gotten louder, but something in it made Ethan flinch. We're not going anywhere, Kayla said, her smile hardening. We've been living here for 2 months. We've established residency. You can't just kick us out. We have rights. Rights? She'd actually said it out loud, the thing she'd been planning all along. I looked at Ethan. Is this what you want? To steal from your own family? I asked him. He still wouldn't look at me. His silence was the loudest answer. It's not stealing, Uncle Rob. We're just being practical, he mumbled. Practical. That was the word that broke the last chain of my patience. That's when I knew this wasn't confusion or poor judgment, not the mistake of a young, foolish man. This was calculated. This wasn't a request. It was a hostile takeover. They had played the long game, waiting until I was gone, until I was unreachable. 3 weeks of absolute freedom to make their move and establish their twisted claim. They had given me a choice. A peaceful vacation or a home to return to. But not both. I turned and walked out of the room without another word. I could hear Kayla behind me saying something to Ethan, her voice low and pleased. I walked downstairs through the wreckage of my living room and out to my truck. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, not from fear, from rage, but also from something else. Clarity. They thought they'd cornered an old man. They thought I was too tired, too lonely, too grateful for their company to fight back. They had no idea what they'd just started. I drove to a cheap motel on the highway, checked in, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet. I could hear traffic outside, the incessant, impersonal noise of the world, and someone's muffled TV through the thin walls. This is where they'd reduced me to. Me, a man who paid off his house a quarter-century ago, now paying for a room while strangers slept in my bed. But that grief, that suffocating sense of violation, that sheer primal anger, it wasn't a weight to crush me. It was about to become fuel. I pulled out my phone. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. I made 3 calls. The first was to my lawyer, Richard Brooks. We'd known each other for 40 years, since back when we were both young and stupid and thought we'd live forever. I told him everything. He listened, without interrupting, and when I finished, He was quiet for a long moment. "Rob," he said finally, his voice hard. "This is elder abuse, financial exploitation. We can pursue this criminally if you want." I cut him off. "I want them out of my house, Richard. Legally, completely, and I want them to understand what they've done. This isn't just about a room, it's about the principle." Richard didn't argue. "Give me 24 hours, he said. "Don't go back there yet. They need to think they've won the first round. Let me handle this right." The second call was to my friend Michael Walsh, a retired RCMP officer who now worked as a private investigator. I needed to know exactly who Kayla was and what I was dealing with. "I'll dig into her background," Michael said. "Financial records, social media, prior addresses. If there's something there, I'll find it." The third call was to my daughter, Laura. She lived in Boston with her family and we talked every Sunday. But this couldn't wait. "Dad," she answered on the second ring, concern already in her voice. "What's wrong?" I told her everything, the whole story. When I finished, she was breathing hard. That absolute. She stopped herself. "Dad, I'm booking a flight. I'll be there tomorrow." "You don't need to do that, honey." "Yes, I do. Mom would have been on the first plane, and so am I. Nobody does this to my father." After we hung up, I sat in that motel room as the sun went down and the neon sign outside flickered on. For the first time in 6 years, in the stale quiet of that motel room, I wished Margaret was still here. Not because I needed her to fight this battle for me. I was ready to fight. But because she would have known exactly what to say to make the hurt a little less sharp. She would have offered not a solution, but comfort, the simple, grounding presence of a shared memory. Instead, I pulled out a notebook. I couldn't rely on comfort. I had to rely on facts. I started writing every detail I could remember. Dates, conversations, every subtle violation. The donated furniture, the repainted walls. Kayla's damning comment about residency rights. Ethan's complete refusal to meet my eyes. I wasn't writing a memoir. I was building a case. I was building something. Not a wall, but a case. And by the time I was done, they'd understand that patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. The next morning, Richard called me at 7:30. I filed for an emergency eviction hearing. We've got a court date in 3 days. In the meantime, I'm sending someone to serve them with a notice to vacate and a restraining order preventing them from damaging or removing any more property. "Can they fight it?" I asked. "They can try, but they're not on the lease. They're not paying rent, and they've destroyed property. Plus, if your PI friend finds what I think he'll find, they won't want this going to court." By noon, Michael called. "You're going to want to sit down for this." I was already sitting, but I gripped the phone tighter. Kayla Reeves, 26, originally from Surrey. She's got a history. 2 years ago, she moved in with an elderly man in Bellevue, claimed she was his caregiver. 6 months later, she'd convinced him to add her to his bank accounts. His daughter caught on and filed charges, but the old man refused to testify. Charges were dropped. My stomach turned. "There's more," Michael continued. "Before that, she lived with a widower in Tacoma. Similar pattern. Moved in as a companion, started isolating him from his family, took control of his finances. That one ended when his son physically removed her from the house. No charges filed because the old man was too embarrassed." "She's done this before," I said quietly. "At least twice that I can confirm. And your nephew Ethan, he's got debts, credit cards, personal loans totaling about $43,000. They're drowning. Rob, your house isn't just convenient. It's a lifeline." After I hung up, I sat very still. The anger had gone cold and sharp. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about stopping someone who'd made a career out of exploiting people's loneliness and trust. If you know someone who's gone through a similar nightmare, share this with them. They need to hear that you're never too old to fight back. Laura arrived that evening. She walked into the motel room, took one look at me, and pulled me into a hug. "We're fixing this, Dad." The next day, a process server showed up at my house at 8 in the morning. I wasn't there, but Laura and I parked down the street and watched. We saw him knock, saw Ethan answer the door, saw him hand over the papers. We saw him hand over the papers. Even from a distance, I could see the color drain from Ethan's face. The realization that the old man hadn't just rolled over hit him like a physical blow. Then Kayla appeared behind him, snatched the papers, read them, and her expression was pure venom. She looked up and down the street, searching for me, searching for the ghost she thought she'd defeated. "Good," Laura said quietly beside me. Her voice was cold, decisive. Let her panic. Let the reality set in. The hearing was set for Friday morning. Richard told me to dress conservatively, speak calmly, and let him handle the legal arguments. "You're the victim here," he said. "Act like it." Thursday night, Michael called with one more piece of information. "Kayla's been posting on social media, photos of your house, calling it her new place, talking about renovations she's planning. She's even got a Pinterest board for the kitchen remodel. I've screenshot everything." "Send it all to Richard," I said. Friday morning, I put on the suit I'd worn to Margaret's funeral. It still fit barely. Laura straightened my tie and squeezed my hand. "You've got this." The courtroom was small, utilitarian. Ethan and Kayla sat on the opposite side with a lawyer they'd somehow scraped together money for. Kayla wore a conservative dress, a cheap attempt to look respectable. Ethan, however, looked sick. The moral rot had finally broken the surface. He was crying silently, shoulders shaking. Kayla had her arms crossed, jaw clenched, glaring at me with a hatred that was almost professional. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no surge of vindication, just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The fight had been won, but the cost was the death of a relationship I could never get back. Justice delivered is rarely a celebration. Outside the courthouse, Laura hugged me. "It's over, Dad," she whispered. "Not yet," I said. That weekend, Laura and I went back to the house with a locksmith. We changed every lock, every window latch, the garage door code. Ethan and Kayla were there packing. They wouldn't look at us. I walked through each room, cataloging what was broken, what was missing, what needed fixing. The list was long, but it was just stuff. Wood and paint and glass. It could all be repaired. In my bedroom, the one they'd claimed. I stood in the doorway and looked at the gray walls. Laura came up beside me, seeing the pain in the empty space. "We'll repaint it," she said softly. "Make it yours again." "No," I said. My voice was firm, a surprising decision. "I think I'll take the guest room. A fresh start. Some things you can't restore. You just have to choose a different path." She looked at me, surprised at first, then nodded, understanding the silent weight of 33 years of memory that couldn't be repainted. "Okay." On Sunday afternoon, Ethan came to the door one last time. He was alone. Kayla was waiting in their car, engine running. "Uncle Rob," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at him, the nephew I'd raised, the boy I'd loved like a son. He looked smaller now, hollowed out by his own choices. "Sorry doesn't fix what you broke," I said quietly. "I know. She made it seem like we were helping you, like you needed us." He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. And then it got out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. I let that lie hang there for a second. "You knew exactly how to stop it, Ethan. You just didn't want to." I saw the flinch of truth in his eyes as he wiped them. The tragedy wasn't his crime. It was his cowardice. "I'll pay you back for everything. The furniture, the repairs, all of it." "You're $43,000 in debt," I said. "Focus on fixing your own life first." He nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. Aunt Margaret would be so disappointed in me. That was the single truest, most heartbreaking thing he'd said in the whole ugly confrontation. It was the only lever of conscience he had left. Yes, I agreed, the word a simple, final pronouncement. She would be. He nodded, turned, and walked toward the waiting car. After they drove away, Laura and I stood in the driveway watching the tail lights disappear around the corner. It wasn't just a nephew that left that day. It was the last ghost of the man I thought he would become. "Do you think he'll be okay?" she asked eventually, once he gets away from her. "And you?" I looked up at the house. My house? It was damaged? Yes. Violated, but it was still standing. "I'll be fine," I said. "I always am." Over the next month, I repaired everything. I didn't hire anyone, I did it myself. Every nail, every stroke of the brush was a reclamation. I repainted the master bedroom myself, restoring the pale green Margaret had loved. I found our wedding photo in a box in the garage, hidden, not destroyed, and rehung it. The furniture was gone, donated to God knows where, an act of petty spite. But Richard helped me file a claim against Kayla's few assets to recover some of the cost. I was trading time and labor for peace of mind, and the deal was worth it. Michael called me 6 weeks after the hearing. "Thought you'd want to know." Ethan and Kayla split up. He moved back in with a buddy from the dockyard. She's already moved in with someone new. Another older guy, this time in Abbotsford. "Did you warn him?" I asked. "Tried. He didn't want to hear it. Some people have to learn the hard way." I thought about calling Ethan, checking on him, but I didn't. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Maybe someday, but not yet. Laura came to visit for Christmas. We cooked dinner together in my kitchen, the one I'd scrubbed clean and reclaimed. As we sat at the table, just the two of us, she raised her glass. To Mom, she said, "And to you for not letting them win." To Margaret, I agreed. Who would have handled this a lot better than I did? "I don't know about that," Laura said. "I think you handled it perfectly. You didn't let anger make you do something stupid. You used the system. You protected yourself. That's exactly what she would have done." Later, after Laura had gone to bed in the guest room, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey. The night air was cold and clean, carrying the salt smell from the ocean. The house was quiet behind me, but it was a good quiet now. Mine again. I thought about Ethan, about the nephew I'd lost to someone else's greed and his own weakness. I thought about Kayla, already moving on to her next victim. I thought about all the people who underestimate old age, who see gray hair and assume weakness. They forget that we got old by surviving, by learning, by becoming harder to break with each passing year. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Uncle Rob, it's Ethan. I left Kayla. I'm starting over. I know you won't forgive me, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. I'm sorry for everything." I stared at the message for a long time, the neon light of the past 5 years flickering. It was a fragile, austere message, but in the silence of my reclaimed home, it carried the weight of a monumental confession. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about fighting eviction. It was about the painful necessity of establishing and protecting my own sacred boundaries. Ethan's message, though late, was an acknowledgement of that line. Forgiveness isn't a gift you hand out. It's a seed you plant only after the ground has been prepared by genuine effort. I wasn't ready to let him back into my life, not because I lacked compassion, but because I finally respected myself enough to demand integrity. My reply, "Good, keep trying," wasn't cruel. It was an act of profound conditional love. It showed him the path toward healing his own life, a path he had to walk alone. And so, I closed the door, feeling the familiar, grounding weight of the lock click into place. This is the hard truth of life. Sometimes protecting your peace means losing a connection, but that space you create is what allows true healing to begin. If this story resonated with a struggle you've faced, a broken trust, a necessary boundary, I hope you'll share this message and let someone else know they are not alone in their fight for self-respect. The greatest reclamation is not of property, but of the soul. Never forget, your boundaries are the walls of your sanctuary.